In this video, I will show you how you can register events on your Windows Form application. In the previous video, we talked about event-driven applications, and we talked about how when the application begins, what we do is the program creates a Form 1 object that persists inside this infinite application loop. And the form object is going to listen for events to occur. And when an event occurs, our form will handle that event and then go back to listening. And that's kind of the way our application runs. Now, on a Windows Form application, there are thousands and thousands of events that we could possibly register with our application. And it would be a waste for your computer's resources if it was actively listening for every possible event that could occur. So to make a more efficient application, instead what we do is we register only the events we care about. So for example, if this form only cared about a button being clicked and didn't care about text box interactions or the form itself being sized or scaled, anything else, we could only register an event for that button click. Now, if you remember, our Windows Form project has a Form 1 class file that exists in two parts, and it has a design view in which we can interact with to try to build the graphical representation of what our form looks like. In the form1.cs file, this is the file that contains the code that we are going to handle. The form1.designer.cs file contains the code that is auto-generated by Visual Studio. And the Form1 design view is where we interact with our form to kind of set up the initial state of the form. So the way we are going to add an event to our application is we are going to go to the design view and select the control we want to register an event for, and then from that control we are going to select the event we are interested in. For example, if I have a button control, I may want to register the click event on the button control. If I have a text box control, I may register the text changed event on the text box control. So an event is registered to a control on the form. An event can also be registered to the form itself. Now in Design View, when we set up and register an event, two things happen. The first thing that happens is a method is created in our form1.cs file, and this method is a shell that will eventually contain the logic that we want to run when we want to handle the event. The second thing that will happen is the event itself is registered in the form1.designer.cs file. So the code that's being written that actually registers the event listening part happens in the Form1 Designer. And the method shell that we are going to implement the logic for is inserted into the CS file, or the form1.cs file. Okay, and all of this occurs when we register an event from the design view. Now, when we register an event from the design view, I'm also going to show how we can unregister an event from the design view, and what happens if we don't do that. So let's look at an example. So here I have a Windows Form application that I haven't done anything to yet. And we have a properties window that we looked at in a previous video. The properties, when I select an item on my form, like the form itself, I have access to all of the properties of this form. So for example, my form has a text property that displays some text in the corner. If I go and change my text property in Design View, I'm going to say this, I'll call this First Form. When I change the text property in the Design View, it changes the appearance in Design View, but it also adds the code. So if I go over to my form1.designer.cs file, it also adds code to this initialize component method that sets the text property to the value that I set it to in Design View, in design mode. So in the design, any change I make in the design view, the code is written to implement that change in the designer.cs file. All right. Now, in my properties window, I see this little wrench and document image. This represents all the properties of my form, but the little lightning bolt next to it represents the events that I can register with this form. So let me click on the events, and let's see the types of events we can register with a form object. So if I go up here, I can either list my events in a categorized view or an alphabetical view. And I'll put it on alphabetical for now. And let's just scroll down to see the types of events we could register with a form. So I can create an event to occur when the background color of my form changes, or when I click on my form, or let's see, when we drag or drop the form, when the form is opening and closing. We can respond to different key presses on my form. When the form is loading, when the mouse is interacting with the form, we can see there are lots and lots of events that we can register with this form. But at the moment, when I run let's go up to the click event handler. For the click event, I have nothing handling the click event currently in my form. So if I run my form, let's run our program. Here's my form object. I'm clicking on my form, but I have not, because I did not register an event to respond to that click, nothing is happening. So why don't we try to make it so that when I click my form, the background changes color. So I want to take this user input of a click and translate it to an action that my application takes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my form. I'm going to find in my events tab, I'm going to find my click event handler, and I'm going to type the name of a method that I want to handle this event. So I'm going to call this handle the form click. You can give this method any name you like. Alright, when I hit enter, several things happened. So in my design view, I see that there is a bold text handle form click next to my click event handler. So what happened behind the scenes was, in my form1.cs file, a method shell was created named handle form click. It's a private method. It returns nothing. It takes some arguments that we will talk about in a future video. But I have the shell of a method where inside this method, we'll say inside this method, we write as in write the code to handle this event. And I can write any code I want to inside this method. So for example, let's say we are inside the form class, so this refers to the form itself. I'm going to change the background color of my form to, let's pick a color here. How about aqua? So when the user clicks the form, this method should be called, and I should change the background color to aqua. Now, also in the form1.designer file, we see this line right here was added to our initialize component method. Basically what it says is, to the click event for the form, I'm adding a new event handler, and I'm passing the method name that's going to handle this event. Now we don't have to really worry about this code. This code is being written behind the scenes, but I want to illustrate that code is being inserted into the initialize component method of my designer view, my designer class, and the shell of the method is created in my form1 class. All right, now let's test this out. Now previously when I clicked on the form, nothing happened, but now we registered an event handler. We are listening for the click event to occur on the form. And when I click on the form, that click event was detected, and the method that we have in form1.cs is called. And what we do when we call the method is we change the background color to aqua. Now when I click this form again, the event method is still being called again and again, but because we're changing the color to the same color it already is, I don't see anything happening. But every time I click the form, that event is being triggered and that method is executing. Let's add another event. If we look down our events, the possible events we can register, how about we look at this form closing event? This form closing event occurs whenever the user closes the form, before the form has been closed and specifies the close reason. Well, let's see what happens here. I'm going to register an event. I'm going to type in, how about handle form closing, and press enter. Now again, two things happened. When I registered the form closing event with my form, in my form1.cs file, I get the shell of a method that will execute when the form closing event is detected. And over in my designer view, I see another line has been added where to the form closing event of my form, I'm adding a new event handler, and we're handling it with this handle form closing method that we've created. Okay, so I'm going to close the designer view. That's behind the scenes. Now, how about when our form closes, let's spawn a little message box that tells the user goodbye. So I'm going to use, there's a thing called a message box class that has a show method, and we can pass in a string of text, and we'll just say goodbye. And we'll see this how this works in a moment. So when the user clicks the form, that we should change the background. When the user closes the form and the form is closing, we should print a message box that says goodbye. So here's our form. When I click it, we detected the click event and we called the appropriate method to handle that event. I can click it again and that method is being called, although we don't see it. Now when I go to close my form, I see this little message box has popped up. When I closed my form, because we registered the form closing event, I have a method that will handle that event. I was listening for that event to occur, and once it occurred, I handled it. And our handler method spawned a little message box that said goodbye. Now, when the message box is done, the form finishes closing. Now, let's say I want to delete an event handler. So I've registered an event handler method for my form, and I'm going to go back here and I'm saying I don't want this event anymore, and I'm going to delete it. I go back to my design view and things are bad. We get a crash here. Okay, what is when you see this screen, what has happened is there is now a conflict between the designer, what the designer code thinks. The designer code over here thinks that there's a method named handle form closing that is registered to handle the form closing event. But because I just deleted the method in my form1.cs class, there's now a conflict, a disassociation between the two halves of my form class. And so we need to resolve that discrepancy. So I'm going to do an undo here and get my method back. If I really wanted to get rid of this form closing method, I didn't want to handle it anymore, the appropriate way to do it is go to design view, select my form, find the method find the event that I don't want to handle anymore, which is form closing. I can right click and select reset. Now by changing the event handler status in design view, that's how I safely remove the code from my designer.cs file. And now in my form1.cs, I can safely remove this method. Okay, and now both my designer and my form1.cs, both halves of my form class will be in agreement, and we can run our program and we are in good shape. So there's our form. It still responds to the background, but when I close it, nothing happens. We removed the event that was listening for the form close event. All right. In the next handful of videos, what I'm going to do is introduce a whole bunch of different controls that we can add to our form object. And for each control, I'm going to talk about some of the properties that might be useful with that control and some of the events we might want to register.